I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining and also thank very much our 6 panelists that are each going to give perspectives, as well as our moderator, Virajita Singh. And to start this panel, we're going to hear from our Dean, Mostafa Kaveh. And Mostafa Kaveh, you are muted.
I certainly am. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, for the very important panel. Many are going to be. I want to start off by thanking the panelists. Your time commitment, your wisdom is something that I'm certainly here to learn from. In fact, I mentioned that every day is a learning experience for me, particularly on this topic, for everything, but particularly in this topic, and particularly at this time. This is a critical time where issues of inequity with the COVID situation is affecting us. It's heightened for all of us. And the unfortunate tragedies the past few months with the murder of George Floyd has brought a lot of issues on racism and systemic racism to the fore for all of us. So the College of Science and Engineering has had a long-standing commitment to issues what I am certainly most proud of in that respect is the work of so many of our students, staff, and some administrators who have been giving so much of their time, effort, and wisdom and commitment to work on this issue within our departments, within our units, and particularly through the leadership of the Alliance, the Diversity and Inclusion Alliance in the college, which we're hoping to continue to support to the extent we can. But some of the things that I just mentioned also have really brought the issue for doubling our effort in this respect to the broader leadership community within the college, department heads, directors, certainly the Office of the Dean. And we've been having rather vigorous discussions and conversations about what we can do going forward. And doing that under the very, very difficult conditions that we're all operating, being distant, being away from each other, but at the same time connected, of course, broadly through the ease of the electronic connections. So again, I'm here to thank you. I'm here to welcome you, and I'm here to learn from you. So let me shut up and hand it back to Ellen. Thank you all so much. Looking forward to your discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Moss. And again, thank you to everyone that has joined. I wanted to start out this panel with an acknowledgement where first I want to acknowledge that the traditional and ancestral territory of the Dakota people upon which we're working and learning at the University of Minnesota. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we all live in a society with systemic racism. And the goal of this panel is really to communicate different perspectives and ideas on strategies that we hope will enhance and improve diversity and inclusivity within departments. And I just want to say a couple things about the format of the panel. First of all, the session is being recorded and will be made available after our completion. And also that we have 6 panelists. We'll hear from all of them. And the panel will be moderated by Virajita Singh, who's the Associate Vice Provost in the Office for Equity and Diversity. And so she'll be kicking it off. The panelists will be speaking. I think that Virajita is going to pose some questions that were submitted ahead of the panel, and we'll also take questions through the chat, and toward the end we'll take a few of those questions as time permits. So now I'd like to turn it over to Virajita, and thank you very much for moderating and being here.
Thank you, Dean Kaveh and Associate Dean Ellen Longmire. I'm really honored to be invited to moderate this conversation. In my role at the Office for Equity and Diversity, I have long been watching as well as collaborating with the College of Science and Engineering, and I know many of you across departments are actively engaged in advancing equity and inclusion. This format specifically was something that was inspiring to me. In my work with equity and diversity, I think there's a lot that can be done, but while there's the theories and frameworks of how this work might be done, it's also a process of embodied and engaged action. And the last I recall being on campus and in connection with the College of Science and Engineering was when the Diversity Alliance had gathered with 70 plus members in that room in Brunick's Hall, talking about the different efforts and hearing from your different members. And it was a reminder to me that this work is collective and it can be done only by each of us engaging in it. And I think you're already on that journey. And I'm very pleased to help moderate this session that will throw more light, not only from panelists within the College of Science and Engineering, but also colleagues from across campus and offer insights on how this work might be done. So with that, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves when they speak, and then also talk for about 5 minutes about their work with some questions that we had sent earlier. I'm going to start with Erincarlson from chemistry.
All right. You might have to remind me what some of those questions were unless you want me to look up the email.
It was just to introduce yourself briefly, and then in your involvement with departmental DEI committees and activities that promote inclusivity, what activities have you pursued? What recommendations do you have for others starting such committees? And is there anything you have learned that you would like to share?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. Erincarlson. I'm faculty in the Department of Chemistry, and I'm currently the chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee. This will be my 3rd year in that position. And the committee was started, I believe, 3 or 4 years before that. So it's been around for a while in comparison to perhaps some other STEM disciplines. And one thing that I think has been really important that we do, and now you can see it beautifully happening in the Alliance, is really making sure that we have voices from every component of the department. So undergraduates, graduate students, staff, postdocs, faculty, because it's really easy as a faculty member to really get disconnected from reality, I suppose. And so one thing that I really enjoy is at the beginning of each year when we have new members and returning members, is we sit down and each talk about the areas of DEI that we're most passionate about. And one of the reasons we do that is a way to form working groups, right? Because there's so many things that can be done. We kind of need to have someone leading each of those efforts. But the best way to do that is to have someone or multiple people who are passionate about it to be leading that. And so as chair, I am more in a logistical capacity of organizing various things, but a lot of the really seminal work has been done by other members of the committee. So I think that was something that is really, I find to be really important about how we function and have been successful. You know, the challenge, of course, is that all of us are doing this on a voluntary basis, and especially now with so much pressure to do a lot of work, that's very difficult. You know, in this summer, you know, a lot of us are trying to have, you know, students and postdocs and faculty engage in service when that's really not typical, and so that's hard. And I think that level of pressure is going to remain. So we have to figure out how to handle that. And I don't have an answer, but I think it's an important topic to think about. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. I'll ask David Odde next from Biomedical Engineering to speak.
Sure, and thanks for inviting me to participate. I'm a professor in the Biomedical Engineering Department and a member of the BME Department D&I Alliance. And we started about 1.5 years ago as a grassroots initiative of like-minded or interested people. It kind of a coincident with the CSE D&I Alliance initiating as well. We've had maybe a core group of 10 to 15 people composed of faculty, staff, and students, mostly graduate students in the student population. We've met pretty regularly, let's say a couple times a semester, we've developed a strategic, mission statement, business vision statement. We've had kind of social events and listening events. So like a Donuts for Diversity event, just to kind of kick things off for our committee and try to engage more people and find out what's on their minds. Yeah, and engaging with listening sessions as well. Some of the work that we've engaged in recently involved, there's a Creating Inclusive Cohorts graduate fellowship program through the graduate school. And our department was granted one of those, and our DEI committee participated in crafting a plan for that and in the recruitment process, and plan to move forward into welcoming them to campus here later this month, and trying to help serve that purpose. To answer some of the questions that were sent out in advance about activities that have been worthwhile, I've pulled some of our other members too to try to integrate this. But as I mentioned, social events and listening sessions, at least for us to get started. So listening, I think, was a key part of getting started. I think an important thing that we've been able to do is just to start norming conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion generally, and in our department context. And I think it's just so great to see so many people on this call, because I think this is part of that process of norming these conversations, and that's been happening in our department. And I'll maybe just note that it's really, a lot of the energy in our group has come from graduate students. And I guess a sidebar to that is it makes me wonder how we engage undergraduate students more in this. And we could maybe talk about that. I might venture that it has something to do with power structures and being in a setting with faculty, for example, and maybe that's the power structure there, the dynamic is too much. But some of the things that we've learned and recommendations, I think the one recommendation would be just start to take some steps, even if they seem small. These could be like socials or listening things. And that can then lead to recommending practice changes. So for example, our committee, had a subgroup has recommended eliminating the GRE as a requirement for graduate admissions in our program. And then secondly, we're wary of burnout within our group because, as Erin mentioned, this is volunteer activity and we want to see change happen, but we're doing it on top of other stuff. And so we feel like we're at a point where we would probably follow chemistry's lead and have more subdivided groups. Thirdly, that resources are important. We can only go so far with the kind of volunteer structure that we have. So this means staff and financial support to actually organize and make things happen. And then finally, I mentioned the power structures. So those would be we've learned.
David, there's a question in the chat that asks, would panelists mind commenting on the proportion of underrepresented students or faculty in your committee? And maybe this is a question that Erin can answer too after you.
Yeah, I think it's 0 for our department.
And this is, of course, the issue when there's not much representation as well, but it's a good question to keep in mind for us going forward. Thank you. Erin, did you want to comment on the committee?
Sure, yeah, I mean, I believe, so last year I was on sabbatical, so I wasn't actually on the committee, but I believe it was 16 members. And I would, without looking at the list to remind myself, that probably 20% would be from an underrepresented group.
Yeah, thank you. So with that, I'm going to invite Eman Ramadan from Computer Science and Engineering to give us her thoughts and introduce herself as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Eman Ramadan. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Computer Science. I have been on our diversity committee for 1 year. We actually started it last fall. Our committee chair is actually Dan Keefe, who has done most of the work, but unfortunately, due to some conflicts, he's not being able to be here. So I'm representing the committee. Our committee has around maybe 15 members. It has 3 grad students who all are female graduate students, and also 1 undergrad student who is also a female student. And we have 2 staff members. So what we actually were working on is developing a departmental plan for the next 3 years. It has goals of addressing how we can actually increase the representation of underrepresented groups in our department, as well as how we can actually improve the retention of these underrepresented groups as well. And also how to increase the, or how to change or improve the faculty hiring, as well as changing some current policies related to like teaching and curriculum and this kind of stuff. I agree with the previous panelists that definitely the conversation is actually was the most helpful. So we have been meeting bi-weekly in the fall, and then in the spring we actually needed to put more time, so we changed it to weekly meetings. We have been meeting in the summer, like the second half of the summer as well, in order to continue this work. And for us, since it's just was the beginning of this diversity effort, so one of the things is what actually can we do and how can we start? So there are many things to work on. So what we have been trying to do is to have this plan in order to list actually what are the existing efforts that have been currently going in the department, and we actually found that there are so many. And then what are the new things that we actually can introduce? And thanks to our department head, Matt, who actually have been very supportive of all our efforts so far. And we have a faculty retreat. We actually haven't introduced the public department yet. We have been also working on a website where we actually have gathered all the resources that actually people can go to. and we have a faculty retreat that we are going to talk about this with the rest of the faculty staff in our department. And then starting fall, there will be some actions like how we can actually have more sessions to talk about diversity in the department, and also how we can include such statements in the curriculum for teaching the different courses. And we were also planning to have a sign-up sheet for different tasks that actually can be done to improve diversity, and then have faculty to actually sign up for such things. Yeah, so I think that would be good.
Thank you, Eman. There's a really good comment in the chat about from Lee Penn, reminding us that it's important to think about how much work we ask of our marginalized departmental members. So some care is essential in thinking about who we ask to do this work, and essential in thinking about how we center the voices of folks with marginalized identities. It's a really good reminder. I think different committees do approach it differently in the work of the diversity community of practice. For example, we've, especially after George Floyd's murder, in hosting spaces, we made a commitment to center Black voices before. So there's ways you can distribute the work and carry the load while also centering voices. Thank you, Eman. So with that, I will ask the next panelist, Rachel Tenney from Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering, to speak to us.
Okay, there it is. Hi, so my name is Rachel, and I'm a graduate student in Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering. I'm beginning my third year in the PhD program, and I joined my department's brand new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at its inception in fall of 2018. So far, we've focused on bringing visibility to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within our department. My cat's gonna crash our meeting. She doesn't like when I'm talking to other people. Anyway, we've been primarily focusing on student experiences. We've brought in speakers to facilitate discussions on mental health, as well as provide introductory faculty training with respect to inclusive teaching practices. One of our most successful events was hosting an end-of-year colloquium last year to celebrate the work and experiences of our international students and faculty in partnership with our Graduate Studies Committee. So my advice for departments forming new committees is to be very cognizant of the possible power dynamics that may emerge. When our committee was formed, it was comprised of a faculty chair, the directors of both undergraduate and graduate studies, a staff representative, and one undergraduate and one graduate student representative. I was the graduate student representative. The only undergraduate member of our committee at that time was also the only person of color on the committee. And I think it's important to recognize that because they ended up resigning from our committee because they felt they could be more effective and better heard elsewhere. So since then, we've restructured our committee a little bit so that people nominate themselves to be on the committee. And we now have at least 2 representatives each of undergraduate and graduate students with offset 2-year terms. And that's improved our dynamic and our productivity. So current projects that we're working on are a department-wide poster campaign and mostly building community across faculty, staff, and students through non-academic type events. In our department, we have a lot of like research-focused events because that's what most of us are here to do. But a lot of our students have mentioned feeling a disconnect between faculty and staff communities. So we have been hosting like coffee, tea, and happy hours just to kind of facilitate more social interactions and really build a dynamic community. So I guess that's all for me. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Rachel, were you also telling us that then there is now almost no diversity on the committee then?
Since we brought more students onto the committee, this past year we had 3 graduate students and 2 undergraduate students. Again, this was a self-nomination process for this year, and we accepted, I guess, everyone who nominated themselves.
And so,
yeah, so I will say that all of the faculty and staff on our committee are white people.
thank you. I'm going to invite Joel Mixon from Humphrey School. I also wanted to acknowledge Joel's contributions to the diversity community of practice, which he's been a longtime member of.
Thank you. My name is Joel Mixon, and I am the Director of Advising and Retention at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. In regards to my work with D&I committees and activities, I've been involved with different iterations of diversity work at the Humphrey School since I started in 2010. So I'm going on my 11th year of doing work as a member of a diversity committee, or what we currently have at the Humphrey School, an Equity and Inclusion Council. Of those, during those years, in the past 6 years, I've been a co-chair of the iteration of the diversity committee, and then now what we call our Equity and Inclusion Council. We transitioned from calling ourselves a diversity committee in 2018 because we felt that the work that we were doing was more around equity and inclusion, and wanted to really specifically focus on aspects of underrepresentation with regard to the areas that we focused on, which were teaching and curriculum, faculty and staff recruitment and retention, student recruitment and retention, outreach and community service, and research. We had a diversity strategic and action plan, which was the forefront of how we did our work around diversity at the time. And we created that plan in the spring of 2012, and it was a 5-year plan. And one of the things that we found was having that plan, it literally just sat on a shelf, and we could always refer back to it. It was like, okay, we have this plan, we have this plan. What we decided to do when we transitioned to the Equity and Inclusion Council is to have more of a living document. Because we're in a graduate program, our students are in and out in 2 years. So we don't have the time, we don't have the time spent with our students to cultivate and to engage and collaborate around some of the things that we were focusing on. So when we look at the work that we're doing at the Humphrey School, we incorporate students, we incorporate alumni, we incorporate faculty, we incorporate staff. And one of the things that we added with our new, what we call implementation strategy plan, is that we added communication, because it was very important for our stakeholders, our community partners, our current community members to know what we're doing around equity and inclusion. And a lot of it was that people didn't know what we were doing. We were doing a lot. There was a lot of work being done from different stakeholder groups, and it was just that we weren't communicating and letting people know what was there or what wasn't there. So one of the things that we did when we transitioned from our diversity plan was that we did some assessments and some evaluation, and we really looked at and used the appreciative inquiry method, or appreciative inquiry model, to gain information from alums, students, faculty, and staff to figure out what were we doing right. You know, what were some of the things that were done in a way that we wanted to continue to do. But then with that appreciative inquiry model, there's some questions you ask, like, you know, what are your 3 wishes, or what do you wish that were happening that weren't happening? And that's where we kind of teased out some of the things that we were falling short in. But it was done in a way that it wasn't, what are you doing wrong, but it's more about what do we wish we would have seen more of. And it really helped us really gravitate to the fact that our community members, our alum, really enjoyed the conversations and the events that we had focused on equity and inclusion. And so we did that. We felt like we did it to an extent that that we still needed to do more work. But some of the things that really focused our attention was on teaching and curriculum. You know, for a policy school, planning, human rights area, did we have the curriculum that we needed to have for our students to be able to go out and be that change in the world that we are, that's part of our, what I would say, part of our mission and part of our focus at the Humphrey School. And we were falling short in that teaching curriculum area, where we showcasing and highlighting the research that our faculty were doing around equity and inclusion issues. And again, to bring to full circle, every fall we got a new cohort of students in. So rather than make them feel like that they were part of something that the train had already left the station, every year now we have a kickoff meeting in the fall where all of our new members, whether they be new faculty, new staff, new students, are able to come together, hear about what we've done, but also help us shape what our next year, our next academic year is going to look like in regards to the equity and inclusion issues, concerns, strategies that we wanted to focus on. So one of the things is we changed from this document that's set on the shelf to lead and to connect our diversity efforts to an actual implementation strategy plan that every year was going to look differently, because we had different members of our community and we had different focus and we have different issues that we want to address. And it wasn't something that we couldn't change or something we couldn't maneuver around for 5 years. So every year we come together and as a community and say, what are we going to work on this year? What are the issues? What are our concerns? How are we going to, make some changes within our curriculum, within the research, within how we recruit and retain students, how we recruit and retain faculty and staff. And again, a lot of this was really focused around the racial aspects of not seeing and not having members of our community that represented, what society looks like for us. So, when someone asked about the percentages, I would say about 10% of our committee members are from underrepresented communities or identities and intersectional aspects of those identities. So for us, we always are mindful of the fact that we have new people coming in every year. We have new members engaging in our community, and we don't want them to feel like they don't have a voice or they don't have a seat at the table. And for us, it's very important, that we do have our alums, because once they finish their degrees, they're out in the workforce, and it's like, we didn't get this, or we didn't know this, or we wish we had been engaged with this, and we're doing a disservice to our student communities if we're not preparing them for the work that they're going to be doing around policy and planning and human rights and such. So for us, our diversity efforts really are focused on a plan, and the committee structure is following that plan. And our deans, our associate dean, and our dean at the Humphrey School appoints staff and faculty and alum to the council on a 3-year cycle. For our students, we invite students that are part of our affinity, groups that are a part of our affinity areas and our student government to have a representative to participate on the Equity and Inclusion Council. So we will have, always have a student voice. Majority of those students are underrepresented students and BIPOC students. So for us, we have that representation and we have the voice, and we get called to the carpet, so to speak, or we get challenged on things that are not happening in the way that students need it to happen. But then we also have faculty, staff, and administrators a part of that, of the committee and of the council that have been there, have seen it, have some institutional knowledge around what has been done and how we can make things better.
Thank you so much, Joel. There's a lot that I think we can address in questions too, but yeah. I remember the living document part of your work at the Humphrey, is really inspiring. I think a lot of us can follow that model. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand it next to Mylene Cubreath from the graduate school.
Good afternoon. I'm Mylene Cubreath, she, her pronouns. I work in the graduate school diversity office, which is housed within the graduate school, the central office. And so in my role, I work primarily with faculty to develop strategies and best practices on how to retain graduate students from historically underrepresented populations. So I'm in a bit of a different situation than most of the panelists. I don't necessarily work specifically with a DEI committee within a program or department, but we have a graduate school consultation team within our office. And we are often asked to come out and do one-on-one consultations with faculty. We lead listening sessions with graduate students. And then we also do grad CRU. So I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but the grad CRU, oh good, yes, lots of head shaking. The grad CRU satisfaction survey, we do quite a bit of that as well. One thing that I will say that Joel hit on really well was that when we're in these spaces, we find that a lot of the contention that we find is centered around perspective or lack of perspective, and a lack of or unmet expectations, right? And so the tensions that we're asked to navigate between faculty and staff are typically in one of those two areas. And so we encourage departments to find ways to seek out what the expectations are between both groups. And then also, how do we share perspective so that we can come to the table willing to engage in an open mind, in an open discourse. So those are things that we found to be most helpful when going into any type of practice, whether that be a listening session or one-on-one consultation, definitely addressing those things.
Thank you, Mylene. I'm going to start with the questions, but I want to be mindful, even though we got some great questions and a lot of questions, I want to make sure we have time for people on the call to ask them directly. So I'm going to combine a set of questions, and panelists, please feel free to respond to any part of it you feel inspired to. So the combination is this: how can departmentals dismantle power hierarchies between faculty and staff or faculty and students? And then how can long-term and short-term strategies to, what are long-term and short-term strategies to improve departmental climate? And finally, how can data on departmental diversity be used effectively to promote DEI? I'm sorry if this is a lot. Respond to any of these things. And please feel free to start,
Sure.
any of the panelists.
I'm happy to start. I think one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in our department that became very clear is that more transparency is needed. And, you know, we can have all the data we want, but if we only discuss it in a faculty meeting, that's not helpful to people in the department to really understand what we already know, what we don't know, what's happening, what needs to be addressed just based on, you know, data and statistics. And so that's one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is how do we make sure that people have the same information, and how they choose to interpret that or do with it is of course up to them, but at least so that everyone knows the same information. I think that's going to be something that's really helpful. And so that's something we've been working on. And I think, you know, there's a lot of work that would need to go into changing power structures, but I think the power of information equality, if you will, is something that would be really helpful, so that it doesn't seem as if things aren't happening, even if they are, for example. So that's something we've been thinking a lot about.
Thank you. So in some ways, folding in the data with the rest of the effort, even as you.
Yeah, I mean, we've also been doing things like updating the website. Another panelist mentioned, you know, a list of resources. We should definitely all discuss this and not duplicate efforts, because chemistry has one with like 200 links or something, and that's just so much work to curate. So I hope out of this will come more collaborative efforts within the college and beyond as well.
Great, thank you. Other panelists?
One thing that I wanted to mention, this is Mylene speaking. One thing that I wanted to mention about Erin's point of transparency, this more looks at advising statements and individual development plans. I don't know how many folks are familiar with those, but they're seemingly very feudal documents. However, they're quite powerful if they're used properly. So this idea that there needs to be a shared expectation of, or shared communication about what's expected of a graduate student and what's expected of the faculty in that relationship. Being able to have that conversation up front. Sometimes we'll find that students, particularly newer graduate students, aren't familiar with what questions they should be asking their faculty. And the lack of expectations or the lack to show up on either part, then at some point creates some sort of dissension between the two. And that then hampers the relationship. So we found that the use of advising statements by faculty, it's a document that allows them to articulate their expectations, their responsibilities, even how they think that students should conduct themselves. It also includes topics about funding, right? So it's this comprehensive document where the student is given a sheet of paper that says, this is what your faculty is expecting of you, and this is a starting point to have a conversation, right? Similarly, there's the individual development plan, where the graduate student develops a communication tool and a plan for how they want to pursue their graduate career. They can then take that document to their faculty member and say, here's what I'm thinking about the next year and a half. Can I get some feedback? Am I on the right track? Am I meeting the expectations? And by having those types of conversations, we find that when you talk about climate from a larger perspective, having those very basic conversations helps to create trust. It helps to create this sense of cohesion between the two that then trickles down to the rest of the environment and the climate as a whole. So those are two documents that we find to be very helpful.
Thank you, Mylene. David, would you like to give us your insights?
Well, I was thinking about the data. I don't think in our department we really have made an effort at this point to collect that. So that's a good point for us to start. I think that gets us a baseline. I think we know that we have a large disparity between where the society is at large and our department. So there's, until that disparity is addressed, we know that we've got more work to do at least. So that's, I guess, how I might respond to the data question. And then shorter long-term strategies for improving climate. I do think, if anyone didn't see it, I'd recommend in a commentary by Stephen Belton that was in the Star Tribune, I think, that this last weekend. And he kind of contrasts most people's sense of trying to respond to, say, racism is to try to do something big and have it play out over the long term. And his advice was the opposite, to go small and start now. So I think by taking what seemed like small steps, educating oneself, engaging in that education with other people, having listening sessions, these seem like small things and you want to like do something big right away. But I think in Belton's view, actually engaging with Black communities, building relationships with Black people, if you're not Black yourself, it starts to shift your mentality. I'm speaking a little bit from my personal perspective here too, but I see it in our committee. I think these small steps have gotten us at least moving, and we're in better position than we were before. And then longer term, still trying to, I think we're in the process of strategic planning in our department. And I think our plan is to integrate that in, not to create a standalone diversity, equity, inclusion part of the strategic plan, but to basically try to bake it into each component: research, education. Don't make it a standalone, again, kind of marginalized thing. Just, it's part of our culture. It's part of how we do it. And I think that could be a longer term, say 5-year time scale of changing the culture and the environment.
Thank you, David. The points you make remind me also of this desire for somehow we will do this work perfectly. We will wait for the right time to do it. And I think we're at this tipping point where action is really needed, and we can assume that it's not going to be perfect, but we move forward as best as we can, and also ask for forgiveness along the way, and not you know, maybe have, our egos may be hurt along the way, but that's okay. So I'm going to ask both Eman and Rachel to comment and then come back to Joel and then open it up for other questions.
So actually, I think it starts with awareness. I think that's an important thing that we actually need to focus on, because some people can just say some things and then they are not aware that it actually hurts others. So some things should be acceptable and some things are not acceptable. So how can we actually do something like this on a large scale, I think? So for example, I really like the sexual harassment training that was sent by the university, and it was mandatory for everyone to take. So they actually were trying to make people aware of what are the different situations and what's the acceptable behavior. So one of these things were just like listing some scenarios and then asking people what is the appropriate response to such scenario. And post like when you're actually experience such thing, and also as an ally, when you see something, what you should actually do. So it has also some resources for people to report such instance. When things happen, where should you go? So I think we actually can do the same thing regarding diversity and inclusive and equality. So I'm not sure if this training exists or not, but I do hope that this exists on just the university-wide. And it nearly can follow the same pattern, because I think it was really good. It has like resources where people can actually educate themselves, and also has channels for reporting such incidents. And I think the progress we can make is that we actually can just mark these incidents and see how much have we improved from this year to the next year. When we actually have 0 incidents, then that's great, which I hope we can achieve one day. And also we need to have underrepresented group to learn how to stand up for themselves. So people can just happen to be in such situations and then kept everything suppressed and not express whatever they have experiencing. And maybe that pressure can actually force people to quit. Like, I don't want to be in that thing. Which affects the retention as well, and as well then will affect the representation. So one of the things that our department has been doing is that we actually have additional courses which can be like in the evening hours, where students can actually sign up for, in order to like get more into depth about the core things that they actually think that they need help on. And that has improved the retention in our department in such courses. And this is one of the things that we're actually planning to continue and even like broaden this part. Yeah.
Thank you. Rachel?
So this is kind of a lot to unpack. This whole time I've been thinking about the like increasing number of lawn signs in my neighborhood. Lots of like, you know, the ones that say in this lot, in this house, Black Lives Matter, science is real, love is love, etc. Excuse me. And in the context of power dynamics, I think, quite frankly, that faculty need to be doing more work. When I first came to University of Minnesota, when I first came to my department, admittedly, I haven't checked in a while, but none of the faculty offices I walked by had any safe zone signs. None had any Black Lives Matter signs outside. None had any safe space kind of representation of any kind. And fortunately for me, because I'm not shy at all, I just asked who would become my future advisor, you know, is it cool that I'm gay? And she was like, sure, like no problem. And that was fine for me. And I was fine with doing that. And I've noticed in my department that the same people are showing up to all of the workshops and all of the trainings over and over again. The Office for Equity and Diversity workshops, the CSE workshops, they're all the same people who are going to these things. And the people who are going to those things repeatedly over and over again are not the people who most need to be going to those things. So I think that the burden needs to be shifted a little bit from mostly students who are doing this work. And I think it needs to be shifted more onto faculty. I hope that wasn't too controversial.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful. I've been seeing comments here on the chat as well as in a private comment, but representation in this work really matters. And one of the observations from somebody in this group today was that mostly it's women that are showing up to the DEI work. I don't know if this is true across departments, but if that is the case, then this is a good moment to think about that as well. As Rachel was saying, more faculty, more staff, and also, you know, people who have greater power in our system have greater responsibility. At least that is sort of my personal view of things. To step up and engage in this work and put our shoulders to the wheel, if you will, to move it forward, because it's not going to happen without us all doing our part. And for some of us, if we have privileged identities, it means that we need to be doing more than those who are actually at the receiving end of this. And thank you for listening to a little bit of preaching here. But with that, I want to turn it to Joel, and then maybe we ask questions. I know we only have a few minutes, but.
So I'll be quick. One of the things that we do at the Humphrey School was actually something that the students had brought to the attention to the leadership, is that they found that some of the faculty weren't able to have conversations in the classroom when things were said or things were brought up. And so we ended up coming together and creating a model and using training through Glenn Singleton with the Pacific Educational Group around courageous conversations. And we had training, again, that we invited alumni to, community partners, faculty, staff, students. So everyone was in the training together. We did that 3 times over a period of a year and a half. And part of the training was putting everybody on the same level. And when we have conversations in our community, specifically around race, but in some of the intersectional aspects of race and other identities, we all had the same model, and we all knew how we were going to essentially have those what we call community conversations. And we were able to plan those out. We were able to, if there was an incident in our community or incident in something that happened in our world, we were able to come together quickly and say, we're going to have a community conversation. And everyone that had experienced that would know that, you know, this is the protocol. You know, there's a compass that we use. Where are you on this particular topic? Are you thinking? Are you believing? Are you feeling? Are you acting? You know, and then there's agreements that you're going to stay engaged, that you're going to experience discomfort, that you're going to speak your truth, and that you're going to expect and accept non-closure. And that last piece about expecting and accepting non-closure was really, really hard, because we're not going to resolve issues, you know, in the span of an hour and a half. But the fact that we were able to come together as a community where faculty are on the same level as students, having conversations about their personal experiences on a particular topic or a particular issue, where staff were also with students. And, you know, it just depended on the topic and how it panned out, so to speak, that you could be at a table with different people in different roles at the Humphrey School and still hearing about their experiences from a personal or human level. And it wasn't that someone is teaching someone else, but they're hearing your story. They're hearing you speak your truth. You know, you're experiencing discomfort. People are finding out things that they never knew, and they move themselves from being intellectual about a topic to, oh, I'm feeling something about this. I'm getting emotional about this. Or being emotional about something and be like, oh, I heard someone say something. Now I'm thinking about it more intellectually, about how I view this topic or how I view this situation. But we were able to do that and draw this model out to bring everyone together so quickly, whether it's something that we planned or whether it's something that because there was a crisis or something that affected our community and we need to come together and have something as a model for us to understand that we all get a chance to speak. We're going to speak our truth. People are going to be uncomfortable, to not, be disengaged, but know that we're not going to necessarily resolve any issues, but just hearing other people and hearing other aspects of where people are coming from on a particular topic allowed us to flatten that hierarchy of, well, if it's the faculty, they know more than me. And as a student, I know my lived experiences and I have something to contribute to this conversation as well. So that's one of the things that I feel like we do well. And we did the training with Glenn Singleton. He's come to the campus. We invited Officer Equity and Diversity to that. We invited the leadership minor faculty and staff to that. We invited UROC. So different community partners were invited to that training, and that we found a model that worked for us to bring together faculty, staff, and students and alum to have conversations, and no one felt like that the faculty knew more or that they had a different level of expertise, especially when we're talking about our own truths.
Thank you, Joel. One thing I recall is, as you mentioned, that it gave the community in Humphrey School language and a framework to work with. But as you use that, you were also building relationships across the whole college and committing to do this work together. I think there are challenges, and I think, again, we've seen some comments in the chat about, we, especially in science, I imagine that the whole evidence-based approach is really prioritized in your ways of thinking. And so I think there is some unique work to be done from a disciplinary standpoint. Like, what does advancing equity and diversity in your fields mean is something that you have to come to it uniquely. I was just in a conversation with, part of a facilitation with writing studies, and they chose to use another framework. They're reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and really delving into that text and coming to terms about what that means in terms of the case being made, but also what does it mean as an individual and a department to be anti-racist. And so there's different ways, but what is the best way for the College of Science and Engineering and all your individual departments is something to be figured out and move forward. So I know we have only a few minutes. Can I ask for anyone from the audience to ask one question in person? I apologize that there was not more time to do that.
I'll give you one that consolidates several that came into me quite recently. And I know the problem is that we don't have enough time, but this reflects comments several people have made. And one direct question is, how can we all act to eliminate bullying and microaggressions within departments?
Any of the panelists would like to speak to that?
I think I think that's something that's really important, and at least one of the other panelists touched on this earlier, but it's really important that people who have privilege in any context are the people doing the most work. And so I was in a training at one point, Lee Penn was leading, and I know they're here today, so shout out Lee. And one of the things that we learned and practiced in this training was interrupting when a microaggression is happening, and ways to do that. I know one example that was given during that training, for example, if you're an instructor, was somebody makes a comment in class. You just say, hey, that wasn't okay. Please see me after class and we can talk about it later. And I think that that's really important. And I think that that needs to be happening in our classrooms, in our labs, in random hallways, wherever people are with each other. That's it.
Yeah,
Thanks a
I do
lot.
agree actually that there has to be some consequences for such actions, because if there are no consequences, then there's no way to stop such people, right? But then when there are consequences, then they can be held accountable.
Yeah, I think that perhaps this is something for the leadership to think about too, on how to create support structures for when there is bullying and harassment, and what actions are taken. So I notice we are at 2 o'clock. I'm going to hand it back to Ellen to wrap up. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all joining us today.
Well, I'd really like to thank our moderator, Virajita, and all of our panelists for really taking the lead and giving you your perspectives and trying to address the various issues that have come up. I agree we can't solve these problems in 1 hour, but what I want to say to close is we will have a record of all of your questions and all of the questions submitted. I will follow up and distribute those back to deans, department heads, and our CSE Alliance so we can think about how we can address them. And otherwise, I hope this panel was informative and thought-provoking to all of you. And I want to say from the dean's level that it's certainly thought-provoking to me, and it's going to help us move in the future in the direction of helping our college and our departments to foster diversity and inclusivity. And if you have further comments and questions, we'd be happy to talk about them with you. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
again
you
to the
very much.
panelists.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.